8 years ago today, on August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And 3 days later, we dropped another on August 9th on Nagasaki. Now, these actions ended World War II. They forced Japan to unconditionally surrender, but Americans today still have a hard time grappling with the fact that we did this. Pew Research recently polled Americans on this. Today, 35% of Americans feel it was justified for the US to use the atomic bombs, 31% say it was not justified, and another third are unsure. So what should you think about this? Well, I'm not here to tell you how you should feel morally about something. All I'm going to encourage you to do is research why we made these decisions. We in the United States know a lot about the European theater in World War II because of the Holocaust and because that was the decisive theater in the Cold War. And I think a lot of us are just oblivious to how bad the war in the Pacific was. Although if you had grandparents or great-grandparents who served in the Pacific, you probably know how bad it was. But if you want to learn more, I'd highly recommend you listen to this week's episode of School of War with Dr. Mark Levesque. He's actually one of my favorite scholars on Christian just war theory, and he's currently writing a book about the US decisions to drop the bombs, specifically through the lens of military ethics and Christian just war theory. I mean, he goes as far in this episode to say it was a moral decision for the United States to drop the bombs, which kind of makes me gasp a little bit. But most people who oppose dropping the bombs today oppose it because it was just so horrific. I mean, I think 200,000 people died almost instantaneously when these bombs were dropped. I also say it was unnecessary because of the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. I say it was unnecessary because the United States had intercepted communications from the Japanese where they were negotiating how they would surrender to the United States before we dropped the bomb. But Dr. Levesque points out a couple things that I actually didn't know about. For instance, while Japan was mulling over how they would surrender to us, they understood that they had lost the war in summer of 1944. They were negotiating a partial surrender. But we would not have the relationship with Japan that we had today had they not unconditionally surrendered. And one of the key principles of Christian just war theory is reunification at the end of the war, that you should want to come together and be partners after the war. That could not have happened had we not dropped the bombs because Japan was not going to unconditionally surrender before that. Also, I mean, Japan was planning to surrender, but it was like how quickly. We did this in summer of 1945. They had been negotiating how they would surrender since 1944 internally. But every month that this war went on in the Pacific, between 200 and 250,000 people, civilians, died throughout the Pacific under the Japanese occupation. So that's like an atomic bomb being dropped every single month throughout the Pacific that the war lingered on. I've heard the argument before that the United States was mulling over a ground invasion of Japan that would have taken longer and we would have lost more American troops' lives. And I actually didn't know this. The United States and the Japanese both knew that the Japanese rice crop had failed. So had the war continued on, millions of Japanese civilians would have lost their lives due to famine. So it's for those reasons that Dr. Levesque says that dropping the bomb was moral. Not because it's inherently good, but because it was like the least bad thing that we could do, and war is bloody and messy and awful. I'm not telling you that you should think that it was a moral action for the United States to drop the bomb. I do recommend you check out this podcast episode if you want to learn more or read Dr. Levesque's work. And also think about what this means for wars that the United States is involved in today. We seem very wary of allowing our allies to push for unconditional surrender of their opponents. We seem very wary of taking out people's nuclear capabilities, even if they're adversaries. Maybe on a day like today, we should rethink those attitudes.